Hello and welcome back to another video. Today we'll be making Marwari regalia for a traditional Breyer. This highly decorative regalia is used in parts of India, mainly Rajasthani. It is used for religious ceremonies as well as weddings, where the groom rides in on a stallion. A popular tradition called horse dance involves teaching the horse to move in a dance-like way when given cues. Some owners put bells on the hooves to jingle as the horse dances. The military style recalls the past when the Marwari was used primarily as a war horse. So let's get into it. The first thing I'll be doing is making the saddle. This will make a nice base for everything else, and there will be a lot. Using my Aves 2-part epoxy, I apply it to my plastic wrapped horse. I do a rough measurement with the scrap paper. I'm using water to smooth it onto the horse. I make sure to use a reference. I'm not sure what kind of saddle this is, but it's very fancy looking. Once I have the base, I can peel it all off and add the seat in the front. Once that all hardened, I primed it with some white primer. Probably rustoleum or something. Now I can paint it red, which right now is looking more pink. But that's okay, I can just add more yellow in the next layer. My reference has these little flaps on the side, so I make a template and cut it out of my vinyl. I paint them this orangey red. Next, I draw on the design with my posca paint pen. I build up the color in layers. I seal the paint with some Liquitex gloss varnish. For the seat, I'm using some glittery orange nail polish. I also add some to the saddle for extra detail. These side flaps have little fringes, so I carefully superglue on some red embroidery thread. Once it's all stuck on, I go back in with a needle to fray it out for a fuller look. Then I can cut off all the excess. I'm using this multicolored ribbon for my stirrup leathers. I make all my buckles with this wire by bending it around my needle nose pliers. Now I can make the girth with that same ribbon. I make a D-ring and then use a crimp hook to make taking it on and off pretty easy. I glue that down and glue this decorative piece over it. For the saddle pad, I'm using this sock. Don't judge me. It has the perfect amount of fluff and they're too big for me anyway. I trim off all the excess. Before I glue it on, I add little rings that I will be attaching the breast collar to. For the stirrups, I'm cutting up a pill packet for the footrest since it has the perfect texture. I glue them onto a piece of wire that I bent. Then I glue some thinner wire to the back. After that's dry, I paint it with my Testors silver enamel paint. I add some little decorative dangles that will match another part of the outfit. I hold it to the horse to measure the stirrup length and then glue them on. So this is the piece that made me want to make this, his fun pom-pom breast collar. Initially I used the smallest pom-poms I could find, but they still ended up looking too big and they didn't lay right when I bent it over his chest. So I scrapped that idea and decided to go with beads. But don't worry, I'll be using some pom-poms later. I measured and cut out a new template and used it to cut out some fabric. I sealed the edges with some clear nail polish so they won't fray. I lightly mark the pattern on with a pencil. Next, I sew on all the little beads. I start in a little, not directly on the edge. It just helps it be a little bit stronger. And then I just repeat that process with all the other rows. I make sure to run the thread back through after I have the row of beads so that they all line up. I attach the part that will loop around the girth, as well as some hooks that will hook to the saddle. found this red trim that looks like tassels and glue it to the bottom edge. Now I can move on to the netting that lays over the body under everything. I found this mesh fabric that is the perfect scale. I measured on the model and cut it out. Now it's not exactly the color palette that I'm working with, so I paint it with some acrylic. I do a few coats until it covers the original color. After that's dry, I make some cuts so it won't wrinkle when it's bent to the horse's shape. I glue that back into place. Next, I glue some embroidery thread around the edge. Now to make a bunch of little tassels. I'm using the fork method. There are a lot of videos that explain this better than me, but basically you put a thread at the top of the fork, then loop the thread around the fork until it's the thickness you want. Then you tie a piece around that between the fork prongs and tie the thread that you first put down. Then you can cut off the excess and use a needle to fluff it up. I repeat that with green, blue, and yellow thread. Then I can carefully tie them on with this top piece of thread. If you want them to be extra strong, you can always add a little bit of glue. Next up is the saddle pad. This will be a military style, so I measure this trapezoid shape and cut it out of this black velvet, which I think used to be a skirt. make sure it's the right size under the saddle. It's time to add the gold fringe. I sew it on and trim off the extra length. I add this trim that matches the edges. Next, I put on these little stars I found in the scrapbook section that push through and then open. I make sure to reinforce them with glue. Now I can make this back armor piece. I score a pattern in this aluminum roof flashing. Then I cut it out with regular scissors. I bend it a little bit to curve over the horse. I glue on this silver trim that has loops in it. For the decorative elements, I had these perfect silver beads. I've had these forever and didn't know what to use them for, but I'm glad I hung on to them. To add the decorative dangles, I use some crimps. I close them and use a ring to attach them to the loops of the trim. I add some hooks and rings to the underside of the saddle pad to make it detachable. For the bridle, a lot of the references had a typical English-style bridle, as well as a decorative one. So first I'm making the plain black bridle. I make more of those buckles with my wire and needle nose pliers. I measure the thickness with the leather cord I'll be using. I cut the headpiece out and cut the sides in half. I glue a buckle to the noseband with a small piece of black fabric so that the end will fit through. Next, I make the cheek pieces and put the bit on, which is just an O-ring with a silver bead on it. Now I can attach with more buckles. It's important to look at photos of real bridles and keep measuring on the model. It's a little hard to explain exactly what I'm doing. With all that drying, I can make the decorative one that will go underneath. I measure out strips of this velvety red ribbon. I glue on some white trim that I had left over from my Sudashi tack. I glue them together in basically the same shape as the other bridle, but without all the buckles and straps. It also has a piece going down the front of the face. One reference I used had this little heart shape. Now to line that with tiny beads. It also has beads that dangle over the nose, so I do some small strings of the beads that hang off. I also added some dark blue beads to the middle of the ribbon. Finally, I sew on an evil eye bead that my family brought back from Turkey, so it's extra special. And now I can put that all on, very carefully. I make some big tassels using the same method, just with yarn instead of embroidery thread. I fluff it out with my cat brush and then flatten it with my straightener and trim the excess. I tie them to the rings so I can attach them to the bridle. Okay, now it's time for some collars. That's right, I'm not done yet. I promised you pompoms, so now we can glue some of those onto the collars. I also put a hook and ring on so I can take them on and off. not sure why this part is so out of focus, but basically I just glued on some gold beads to represent bells onto the leg ribbons. Also going on the legs are some tassels. I loop some thread around a piece of wire, glue it, and then color the wire with nail polish. Then I can fray them with the needle. Then I loop the tops so they won't slide out and glue them to the ribbon. I made them wire so I can bend them to give the illusion of movement. I add this last little detail to the back of the saddle as well as some reins. And finally, we're all done. Time for the final result. I really love how it turned out, and I think it looks really good on this mold. Almost like he is prancing and shaking the bells. Thank you for watching. I hope you learned something. If you enjoyed, make sure to boop that like button and subscribe for more projects.